Good morning, almost afternoon to everyone. My name is Jessica Harper, and I'm the Expectant and Parenting Youth Coordinator for the Public Education Department. And I'm excited to welcome you to our next workshop, Trauma-Sensitive Resiliency, and it's a toolkit for well-being. Erin is a psychotherapist and mindfulness facilitator and program developer based in Santa Fe, New Mexico. She serves as the program director for the Sky Center of the New Mexico Suicide Intervention Project and sees clients in her private practice, Hello Wellness Therapy. And Erin, the floor is all yours.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm going to take a quick moment to scroll through so I can see who's here. People are joining. Nice to see you. Nice to see you. Welcome. We're going to start with a quick poll while I'm introducing myself, because I'd love to know more about who's here today. Starting with the poll, what's your role in school health? My professional intro was just given, but I also want to share a little bit of the personal. This is such a, every word I think to choose is an understatement about the context right now that we're living in. But such an intense time. I come to you today as the daughter of a retired English teacher from Capitol High School in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And her experience as a teacher, she retired 2 years ago, and she's been subbing in the public schools in Santa Fe. Her experience as a teacher, the context within she was doing her work and doing it passionately, and how it impacted her resiliency was a huge impact. Made a huge impact on the kind of work that we are doing at the Sky Center of the New Mexico Suicide Intervention Project to support educators. So I think the poll might be complete, and it looks like we have a lot of counselors here today, teachers, social workers, and less on the admin side. So that's great. And I'm also going into this fall as a mom. I've got a rising 5th grader and a rising 9th grader. And then the Sky Center is embedded in Ortiz Middle School here in Santa Fe, where I'm speaking to you from. I'm in my private practice office, but during the school year, I office inside of the Sky Center, inside of Ortiz Middle School. It's a community health center that has a continuum of programs that are both offering direct service, free family counseling, groups in the schools, peer support, but also we are doing more work like this workshop today in order to influence contexts, in order to influence spaces. We know that in order to be truly resilient in the face of daunting work, like the work that we do of suicide prevention, it's not just the responsibility of the individual doing the work to be resilient. We need to be sitting inside of resilient spaces. So that's part of the intention of my being here today. As everything is disintegrating, as everything we know it, the context that we're used to be sitting inside of is shifting. What does the future look like as we enter a year where we are going to be doing hybrid learning, where we may be fully remote? Some of you out there may be doing in person because the state seems to have, at least not yet, but have different local contexts for how we're going to show up. And naturally, we all feel a little out of our league right now because this, as the speaker Brene Brown says, this is our first freaking time to go through a pandemic and to teach in a context like this. So with that, with no further ado, I'm going to start sharing the screen so we can launch into ways that we can take care of ourselves inside of the context that we're entering in this new horizon we're stepping into this fall. And think about the ways that that will impact the youth that we are all serving? How we take care of ourselves, how does that impact the context for the youth that we're serving? What are we modeling? How can we show up this year in spite of all that we're holding for ourselves, and yet at the same time still want to be able to show up for the students that we're going to serve? So that's the question of the day. And while I don't claim to have all the answers at all, I do know some practices from my work as a clinician, working with some of the most hopeless narratives and taking in the exposure to that trauma day after day for about 10 years now, how to maintain my own hope, my own regulation in the face of that. And that's what I hope to offer today. Knowing that in the context of social work, counseling, education, for us as practitioners, there are a lot of skill sets that we are offered for resiliency, but knowing in relationship to my mom that in the context of education, that isn't always as emphasized. So that's part of our hope, to bring some of this into systems where they're not traditionally offered. So I'm going to pull up my PowerPoint. So just an overview for what to expect today. We've begun with connecting, and we're going to practice two of the most important practices for resiliency along the way today. Those two practices, what Ann Maston, a resiliency researcher out of the University of Minnesota, calls ordinary magic. The ordinary magic of social connection and self-regulation. And I'll explain more about this along the way, but those are the two primary things we need for resiliency. And of course, inside of this context where we're more isolated than ever, it can be more challenging. So what is the Toolkit for Well-Being? It's a framework that serves as the underpinning of all the work that we do to support our mission of youth suicide prevention at the Sky Center. And so it's a lens that we're looking through, but also a collection of therapy and related practices that we deliver throughout our programming in family therapy rooms, youth groups, and in specific workshops like this one. We're serving all of New Mexico, but we're also serving ourselves. And what I mean by that is that all of these practices, while they've been informed by all kinds of resiliency research, the ones that we are specifically focused on at the New Mexico Suicide Intervention Project are related to the antidotes for suicide. Social connection is an antidote to isolation. Self-regulation, an antidote to the risk factors of an inability to manage our moods, manage impulsivity. Mindful awareness as an antidote to the two key risk factors of depression and anxiety. Physiological well-being, antidotes to both the adverse health conditions that can make us more at risk for mental health issues, but also addressing adverse contexts where we have barriers to the resources for our optimal health, hope as an antidote to hopelessness, and nature as an antidote to the suicide risk factor of lack of connection to meaning and purpose. And we'll dive deeper into this, but I wanted to give you the framework that we are looking through and why these practices specifically are relevant to the work that we're doing to make ourselves sustainable at the Sky Center. So as we begin this conversation today, we're also seeing through the frame of our own nervous systems and our own ability to bring ourselves into balance. And I want to qualify this. Our nervous system is incredibly adaptive to the context that we're in. Self-regulation is defined as being able to manage our behavior appropriate to the environment that we're in. And I think self-regulation can often get confused with, I must remain calm at all times. And I want to be really clear that that's not what we're saying, because we have this incredibly adaptive nervous system that takes care of us in life-threatening situations. It would not benefit us to turn ourselves into placid people who are never aware or able to respond to threat. In fact, we need to be in rage in certain contexts. We need to be expressing ourselves loudly and clearly in certain contexts. We need to be making a fuss. We don't need to necessarily be placid at all times. So I want to be really clear about this as we go into some of the practices that I'm offering today. Where we get in trouble though, however, and our students can get in trouble, is when we're not inside of a context where that rage or that dysregulation, where we're in our stress response, where we're feeling like our life is under threat, and in the context that we're in, we're actually okay. But because we've been in fifth gear, we're not exactly sure how to downshift. So some of the practices I'm offering today are when I'm in a context where I need to show up in a regulated way, where I need to be aware that the threat is not imminent, that I want to be present for the student that I'm serving. How can I downregulate? What are some of those practices? And if we're in a state where we're so depleted and exhausted that we are in a state of what's called hypoarousal, how do I mobilize myself so that I actually have the energy to show up? And I know a lot of us are feeling exhausted. I was talking to a teacher friend just yesterday who said, you know, usually I get the summer off to really recharge and reboot. And maybe some of you can relate to that statement. She said, I feel like I'm going into this school year exhausted because so much of the summer has been about planning and shifting gears and thinking about how to, you know, get online and do Zoom learning in a new way. So some of this is, it's not necessarily about finding the calm, it's also about finding the energy that we need. What are the practices that we need to be able to regulate between these two extremes and bring ourselves back into balance? So I invite you all to notice where you're at right now. Is there a feeling of tiredness? Is there a feeling of maybe feeling activated? Are we on the more stressful side of the equation as we look at this slide, looking at the responses that get us out of a life-threatening situation when we need to? Are we in a state of calm? Our state of calm is when we're in our parasympathetic nervous system. However, if we're in that stress state for too long, our parasympathetic can actually take us all the way into a state of freeze, which is also a way to get ourselves out of a threatening situation. We've been on overdrive or we need to protect ourselves. We will actually put our emergency brake on and go into a state of freeze, which is also part of our parasympathetic nervous system. We're adapting. Our body needs to go into exhaustion and shutdown when we've been in stress for too long. This toolkit for well-being, practicing in each of the different components on a regular basis, can serve as shock absorbers for the work at hand. I think we tend to think of resiliency as, well, I'm going to go till the gas is out of the tank and I need to take the car to the shop. This radical new way of looking at resiliency says, we actually want to practice along the way so that we're not burning ourselves out, having to do a complete overhaul, but we're actually bolstering our system with really good shock absorbers to absorb and adapt to the stress, even the trauma that we're embedded inside along the way. When we have the awareness of where we're at, where we are at, even right in this moment, when we can notice what our nervous system, what messages am I getting? Am I feeling that I'm safe, or am I feeling that I'm under some kind of threat? And that may appear as judgment or irritability, something that feels a little bit threatening about any part of this moment, and it's all perfectly okay. We're just noticing what we notice. As we have that awareness and that ability to notice and name, we have some choice. And because some of the material that I'm going to offer after this first initial practice today can be a little bit evocative, we're going to go through what some of the symptoms of trauma exposure are. Even with that, my heart rate goes up a little bit. I'm sensitive to the context that we're all in. We're all witnessing and in a heightened state of alert, because that is what is true in our environment right now. So what I'd like to offer us to begin, before we go into the more challenging material and the practices of safety, but to begin, I'd like to give you a practice that will give you the choice to bring your nervous system back into safety as you need it during our time together. So we're going to try something on for size. It's called grounding and resourcing, which may be familiar to many of you. Today, I'd like to offer this experience to all of you to begin. As with any practice, of course, I want you to be aware of where you're at today, and you just have the choice to relax and listen and take it in, maybe take notes, not practice along today if it doesn't feel comfortable to you. If you are up for it, I invite you now to mute your screen if you'd like, because I will be inviting us to close our eyes if you feel comfortable with that. Of course, nobody needs to do that. I'm going to offer a couple different options for this practice. First, we'll find our ground, and then we'll tune into a resource. A resource is something that we can turn to for soothing and for comfort and for anchor when we feel disoriented, when we feel our mind has wandered into an unhelpful place. So I invite you to find a comfortable position. I invite you to close your eyes now if that feels comfortable to you. And I'll invite you to notice your feet on the ground, your seat in your chair, and your back against the seat if you're sitting down. This can be done with eyes open or closed. If your eyes are open, I'll invite you to find something in your environment that you find pleasing or at least neutral that you can focus your gaze on. If there's a window in your environment, even better. I'll invite you to take in some nature that you're seeing outside. If there's any blue sky or leaves, as long as it feels soothing, pleasant, or neutral to you. If you're casting your gaze on something in your environment, maybe it's a plant or a picture, if there is something available to you in your immediate environment that evokes nature, I invite you to tune your gaze on that. If your eyes are closed, I'll invite you to bring into mind a place in the natural environment, imagined or real, that has provided you in the past or in your imagination some comfort. Where is this place? What colors are present here? What is the quality of the light? If there's water present, how is the water moving? Maybe in your imagination, you might be able to even sense into the temperature of the air hitting your skin. Really seeing with your imagination if you're able to tune in to this place in your natural environment. And as you do so, returning your attention once again to your feet, to your seat, to your back, and taking a blueprint or an X-ray of this moment, might you be able to pair whatever soothing or comfort that is available to you in this moment and connect it to where your feet, seat, or back connect, to where you feel held to the ground by gravity. And before this practice closes, I invite you once again to really see where it is your imagination has taken you. If your resource is one that's external with your eyes open, imprinting in your memory this image as well, the colors, shapes, quality of light that are present here for you. Noticing what you're aware of now, allowing yourself to take this mental picture, blueprint, X-ray, paired with how you're feeling in your body, connected to feet, seat, or the back of the chair. And when you're ready, I invite you to return your video to unmute yourself. And we'll take a moment to go into some pairs or groups of 3. Jackie's going to help me with this. And before we do that, though, the invitation is to share with your partners what your resource was, where you went, or if it was something in your environment, what was it, and how did that make you feel? And as you share that information with each other, I invite you to notice what happens as you share that regulating resource with your partner. And we'll come back together in about 5 minutes. And if there are any questions for me before you go into the breakout rooms, please chat now and let me know if I can clarify anything.
So it was very nice to hear how others find peace. It was very calming. It was beautiful to hear others talk about their space. Christina is at the beach with white sand and clear blue water. It was awesome to hear that everyone draws their energy from a different place. Excellent refocus and relaxation technique. I use 60 seconds in my classroom every day. Love it. Unfortunately, I had trouble connecting to the room. I'm sorry, Sandra. Lots of calmness. But Hannah, imagine being in the mountains. She was feeling the grass on her feet, smelling the pine needles, hearing aspen leaves rustling, and the river run.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing, everybody. As we talk about, whoops, my thumbnails are going away. Okay, as we talk about, what we want to be sensitive to trauma, it's important that we're trauma sensitive ourselves. It's important that we have a resource to return to today. So at any point that you find your nervous system feeling not like it feels right now in this moment, I got so soothed just hearing all the different environments that you were naming. Just feeling your feet on the ground or your seat in your chair or your back is a way to connect that body sensation to that peaceful place. And that's actually a gift you can take into this year with you. Seeing if that can become a routine practice, that when I feel my feet on the floor or my seat in my chair or my back against my chair on my 1000th Zoom call, or I notice that I have a student across the screen from me. How do I bring myself back into some regulation? This is a tool for you. And this is a tool that you can, of course, also offer someone that you're working with. So the chat was just hidden, I just found it, but moving on. So what are we talking about when we talk about the symptoms of toxic stress? And we all have a bit of this, and it may look different for all of us right now. We may have noticed this before the context of the pandemic, before the context of our world feeling like the ground beneath us is shifting with every step. I think it's useful to review, because with the awareness of where we are, we might not always be able to make an adjustment, but we might be able to reach for one of the tools in the toolkit in order to bring ourselves back into a regulated place. So overwhelm, the sense that life is too much, busyness. It's interesting because at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a lot of talk about slowness and this radical pause. And at least speaking from my own personal experience, busyness became a new norm. It just was in a different form. So that's something that I bring into my awareness as a red flag for myself. Rumination, over and over again, that broken record in our heads where we're unable to take ourselves out of that. Dissociation, this can happen sometimes where we just feel cut off. It's adaptive. Sometimes when it's too much, when the phone gets too hot, it needs to turn itself off, and we are no different. Sometimes, though, when we can notice, we may be able to do something about it with regulating resources. And narcissism, and we're not talking about this as pathology, but just an attunement that's more inward rather than noticing what's going on, the impact of context on those around us as well, not just ourselves. And these are all red flags, I think, most of us can relate to when we've been in fifth gear for a little too long. When toxic stress and acute stress moves into post-traumatic stress disorder, as with everything, there's a timeline when a diagnosis for a disorder is offered. And these are the symptoms, and we're all going to be experiencing these symptoms in an acute way when we feel disoriented. What we're noticing for in ourselves, or looking for in ourselves, and those we're serving, are these 4 clusters. Re-experiencing, that's what we commonly think of as flashbacks, when the triggering event just appears out of nowhere. And this can be triggered in the old context of the classroom, of slamming doors or voices being raised. In this new context, it's going to be a little trickier to identify it in our students, but we certainly can see it in ourselves. Avoidance looks like the student who's going to the bathroom 10 times a day in order to avoid the environment. A lot of times it looks like misbehavior. In ourselves, it might look like, wow, my screen time showed me I spent 4 hours on Instagram today. How did that happen? We're maybe shopping or using substances more than we typically do. That is what avoidance might look like. Hyperarousal, jumpiness, a trigger, things startling us in an outsized way. Negative thoughts and beliefs are more associated with mood, issues with our moods, moving into anxiety, catastrophizing, or depressive ruminative thoughts. So this is what we want to have some awareness of. And if we feel like we've been in this place for a month or 2 or longer, it's time to seek some help and to be able to notice this in the youth that we serve. So we began by talking about a tendency of our nervous system to go into hyperarousal, that hypervigilant stress state, or on the other end of the spectrum into hypoarousal. So our nervous system can be thought of as a ladder. When we are in that safe place where we started, that place of safety and regulation, we're in what's called our ventral vagal nervous system, or our window of tolerance. That's where we can perform at an optimal level. That's where we feel safe and curious and connected. And like I said at the beginning, it's impossible for any of us to be living in that state, nor do we want to or need to. A healthy nervous system is adapting, is flowing in and out of these states, oscillating through these states throughout our day. And when we're in a life-threatening situation, we don't want to take ourselves out of the ability to act without thinking or to shut ourselves down to repair. This is really an important part of our adaptivity as humans, and our flexibility and our ability to be resilient. Showing up for the work that we need to do, however, and because we are in this unprecedented context, stuck in fifth gear, constantly exposed to things that we can't control, we do, when we are in safe spaces, need to see if we can find a way to practice being inside that window of tolerance. We are practicing worry, busy, anxious, rumination without a lot of help right now. In order to widen that window of tolerance so that we can show up for the work at hand, we need to have some strategies and to create some balance for the context that we're inside of most of the time. Moments like this here together, finding ways to connect and to soothe ourselves to come back into balance when it's available to us. And as I began, part of it's about context. So as we all, and I know we've all been immersed in trauma-informed practices for a few years now in education, but just to review, we're all realizing the widespread impact, step one. We're recognizing the signs and symptoms as we've just reviewed. And we're responding by integrating this knowledge into our policies, procedures, and practices. And I appreciate that that's why you're all here today. How do I bring this into my new classroom, my new online classroom? What does that look like? So that I can actively resist re-traumatizing the students that I'm working with, my colleagues. In this context, I can share, I'm teaching a mindfulness class right now. And in that context, I'm constantly thinking about the kinds of words I'm using. For example, right now I'm going to use a word that might actually feel slightly triggering, which is the word contagion. Immediately we think about the pandemic that's swirling all around us. And so slowing myself down, being able to think about language so that I can create a safer context, even if it's virtual, is part of the intention for the kind of context that we want to create for our students. And of course, part of that context is, am I showing up seeming really frazzled, or am I able to show up in a way that creates a process of co-regulation? Co-regulation, I've talked about self-regulation. I am able to bring myself into a kind of behavior that's appropriate for the context that I'm in. Once I do that, I may have the capacity to pass that on to the people that I'm sitting with. And so that's the work that we're doing today. It's not always easy when we're going through the exact same situation that the people that we're serving are in this context. But at the same time, if we can bring some of that capacity into our body, we literally embody it and are able to pass it on to those that we're serving. So switching gears here a little bit, as you all can see, there is an orchid and a dandelion on your screen. Some of you may be familiar with a study that was done out of the University of Arizona that compared youth to orchids and dandelions. And the truth is, we're all a little bit orchid and all a little bit dandelion on a given day of the week. The analogy is that the dandelion children, in spite of whatever environment that they've been planted in, are somehow able to thrive anywhere, to bloom and prosper, while the orchid children need a more particular kind of environment in order to flower into the gorgeous creatures that they are. And I can share that I have both an orchid and a dandelion at home and my two children, and that they swap those roles on any given day of the week. We're definitely on a spectrum here. But the study is, what is it about the dandelion children who do have that capacity to thrive? And what can we learn ourselves about what kind of environment we need, but also what kind of internal environment that we need to thrive? What is it that they've got? And the good news is that well-being, the capacity for holistic health, spiritually, emotionally, mentally, physically, is something that can be cultivated. There are actually practices that can help us embody, internalize the qualities of dandelions, while we also don't want to lose any of our capacity to shine like orchids. So enter the toolkit. We're wired to belong. We're interdependent. We need each other to survive, and this is embedded in our nervous system. From an evolutionary biology perspective, our nervous system knows that we will not make it in this world without the help of other human beings. In this context of isolation, it's very important that we have practices, even through a Zoom screen, that remind us that we're not alone. So I want to offer just a quick on-the-go practice that can be offered to you right this moment, even though we're all in our own spaces and not able to connect to each other face to face. And even though we often find ourselves isolated, there are 3 universal practices for mammalian soothing. And so I'd like to offer this first to you before we enter into a practice, to be able to offer this to ourselves. And as you can see on the screen, they're physical warmth, gentle soft vocalization, and a kind soothing touch. So just these 3 alone, as we sit in our environments and seek to offer ourselves the regulation we seek to offer each other, making sure we're physically warm, even a kind soothing touch to ourselves. If it feels comfortable, you can try what I'm doing. I have a friend, Deborah Salazar Shapiro. She's a mindfulness teacher. You can find her online. She's wonderful. But she offered this self-compassion practice of placing a hand on our heart, placing our other hand on this hand, and saying, "There, there." Patting our own hand like we might pat a baby. And I don't know about you, but right in this moment, that gives me some comfort. And a gentle soft vocalization that might look like I need to put on my softest, best music that makes me feel good, or I might try to find that in my own head. This is hard. This time is hard, or I feel sad. Those voices offer me inside of myself a lot more comfort than the typical coping strategies we have of possibly catastrophizing, going into worst case scenarios, avoiding, denying what's going on altogether by distracting ourselves, or having that extra glass of wine, whatever that might look like. Or maybe we blame ourselves in some way, or we judge or blame others. Self-compassion is a 4th strategy that brings in the soothing capacity to restore that balance that we're seeking right now. There. So practice, an on-the-go practice, another on-the-go practice that I'd like to offer for your consideration is a mindful self-compassion break. This is from Kristen Neff's Self-Compassion Practices out of the University of Texas. And it's can be practiced briefly or in a longer sense. But for me, I am doing this a lot and have been doing this a lot even before the pandemic. When the going gets tough, mindful self-compassion is comprised of 3 parts. The first part of a mindful self-compassion break is that we notice that we're suffering. We're so consumed and lost in the narrative of our suffering that we often don't notice how we're feeling that in our body. So step 1 is a moment of mindfulness where we notice that we're struggling. And we ask ourselves, we get curious about how I notice that in my body. I notice for me, and you can think about this for your own awareness, but for me, it's a tight throat that kind of goes into a tightness in my heart space. And that's where I know, ouch, I'm having a moment of struggle. I'm having a moment of difficulty. Step 2 of a mindful self-compassion break is remembering our shared humanity, our common humanity. Remembering that we're not alone in this, with an awareness of context. We may all be in the same storm right now, but we're not all in the same boat. So wanting to bring that into awareness. And yet at the same time, this hurt in our heart, we can connect to universally for the disorientation, the struggle, and the grief that we are going through globally right now. I remember early on just feeling that pain, that moment of mindfulness so intensely in my heart, and having this moment of realization, there's not a person on the planet who's tapped into this narrative around the pandemic, around racial justice, around oppression, marginalization, deconstruction, disorientation, that does not feel this pain in their heart right now. And because I can connect into that, I can connect into the common humanity around that. There was some comfort in that for me, and that may not be true for everyone, but I offer that experience to connect with around our common humanity. That's step 2. And step 3 is if we can find a way to offer ourselves some kindness. And those 3 mammalian strategies are go-tos. So that coziness, a soft, soothing vocalization through music or a kind word. Ouch, this is hard. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. And even being able to offer ourselves a soothing touch, if that's possible for us. Seeing if we can just trigger that parasympathetic nervous system response even for a moment. So it's not as much about the conceptual, but the physical, which is a thread throughout this talk today. How can we embody soothing? How can we regulate ourselves, not think our way through the problem, but feel our way into some kind of comfort, which actually brings the problem-solving mechanisms back online so that we're better able to solve the problems at hand and act. When we're not in our regulated nervous system, when we're not in our window of tolerance, we're less able to act in a way that will be skillful and productive. So we've talked about this a lot, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I will offer a really quick practice that can, if you're in hyperarousal, bring you a little bit down, which is, it's called straw breath. So I invite you to try along with me. You take a nice deep breath in and breathe out as if through a straw. Nice breath in. So that's straw breath. Sighing does the trick too. But I find a straw breath when I'm in a moment of hyperarousal can be very skillful for me to be able to stop, take that breath, observe before I proceed with an action. That's another acronym that's very helpful. If you don't know it already, stop, take a breath, observe what's going on inside of you and outside of you before you proceed. So a couple on the go for self-regulation. So mindful awareness, when we talk about mindful awareness at the Sky Center, we're mostly interested, even though we're interested in so many of the benefits that research is showing, this very simple practice can be of benefit. At the Sky Center, we're talking about depression and anxiety. We're talking about the fact that a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. A wandering mind into the future is associated with anxiety. A wandering mind into the past is associated with depression. When we're wandering into the future, we're going into that mindset possibly of worst case scenarios and things over which we have no control in the future. And that can be very threatening to our nervous system and also just trigger feelings of helplessness. When our mind is wandering into the past, it can get lost more in regret or shame or the ways that we wish it were different now, the grief that a lot of us are experiencing. And it's not that our mind shouldn't be doing those things. Again, it's adaptive. When our mind wanders into the past, into threatening situations, it's our way of saying, how do I avoid that the next time? And that's skillful. And when our mind is wandering into the future to ward off threat, that's skillful too. How can I do it differently so I can prevent that threat? However, when it's unskillful is when we're getting stuck there. And this moment is truly the only moment that we have any control over. Mindful awareness brings us back to the here and now. If we're in a life-threatening situation, we will act. It is not to make us placid. It is not to make us complacent. I think that that can be a misunderstanding of this practice. Mindful awareness can actually bring us into the moments that we can act in a more skillful way. An example of this is my child has had asthma episodes. Mindful awareness in a quick flash can take me out of catastrophizing over the worst case scenarios or the woulda, coulda, shouldas of how I could have been a better mom and prevented it, and brought me into the moment of what does my child need now? Let's bring my thinking, reasoning, judging mind back here. It's not that this moment is the one I would choose, but with this practice, with this shock absorber practice, something that I practice on a regular basis, I have more control over where my mind is. And with practice, mindful awareness helps us. It is an antidote to the mind's tendency to be lost in the future or lost in the past. Hope. I say it like that because it's tricky right now. It's tricky right now when we don't have a clear path ahead, when we aren't able to tell ourselves, you can hear my voice go a little bit, or my children, my 5th grader and my 9th grader, Mom, will we be doing X, Y, and Z next summer? Mom, will I be in school in 2 months? I don't know, right? I don't know. But we cannot give up hope that there is a trajectory beyond what we cannot see. I love this quote, and I'll read it for us. Hope is a belief that what we do might matter, an understanding that the future is not yet written. It's informed, astute, open-mindedness about what can happen and what role we may play in it. Hope looks forward, but it draws its energies from the past, from knowing histories, including our victories, and their complexities and imperfections. It means not being the perfect that is the enemy of the good, not snatching defeat from the jaws of victory, and not assuming you know what will happen when the future is unknown. So, before we move on, I'd like to take us somewhere collectively, a practice to cultivate some of the hope that can be hard to anchor into these days. And so the invitation once again is to close your screen if that feels comfortable. And you're welcome to keep your eyes open always. Trauma sensitivity allows for an awareness that closing our eyes is really not a practice that feels safe for all of us. And I have a deep awareness around that, especially for a lot of the students that we work with. So just to clarify why I'm always offering an option for eyes open or eyes closed. It can really take us into those wandering mind places that we might not want to go. So keeping our eyes open is one way to stay in the here and now. And tuning into an external resource is always skillful for the students that we're working for if you are going to be offering any of these kinds of practices. And for ourselves, obviously. So I'm looking up at a picture I have in front of you, and I invite you to do the same, or to look at the flowers on the screen. This is a guided visualization, so if you're able to just soften your gaze and maybe attune into your lap, or for some of you, you might want to have a pen and paper and actually do this as a journal, a journaling exercise. So that's an invitation too. If you do feel comfortable closing your eyes, I invite you to do so now. And to find a comfortable posture. Feel your feet, your seat, your back. And as we started today, just to take care of yourself wherever you're at right now. And if it feels more comfortable to just listen and relax and consider my words, of course, please do so. No pressure to follow along, get it right. Permission to pass is always yours. And I invite us to notice our breaths. To start with a moment of mindful awareness. Our minds are so skilled at wandering, and seeing if by tuning in to the breath and the body, who can only be here in the here and now, we're able to bring our awareness, our attention into this moment. Seeing if we can notice on the in-breath our belly rising, on the out-breath our belly falling. Seeing if you notice anywhere in your body where there's some tension, and if you're able to release. And if not, that's okay too, just noticing. Maybe even offering some compassion for what's here and what might be hard. And so with kindness for wherever your mind and heart are today, seeing if you can tune into where it feels tender. If there's some difficulty present, noticing where it is, where it's calling for attention in your body. And without diving too deeply into the difficulty, I invite you to just bring awareness to any fear or hurt or anger, impatience, anxiety, whatever it is that might be present for you as we work within the context that we're working with right now. If your heart feels at peace, of course, the invitation to notice that this is alive for you in this moment. Just noticing. Now I invite you to gaze into the future, maybe 10 or 20 years from now, and visualize your future self's home. Where in this home do you see your future self? Are you inside or outside? Are you in a certain room? Are there pictures, furnishings, or plants nearby that hold a special meaning for you? What does your future self look like? Your clothing, your facial expression. What do you see? What is the expression in your future self's eyes? Can you sense kindness or a caring welcome? I invite you to take some moments to connect with the place that you feel most stuck or vulnerable. If this is alive for you, then please share your difficulty with your future self. Now I invite you to imagine that your future self is offering healing attention and care to your current self. You might feel that you are receiving a touch of kindness, or maybe even an energetic embrace. You might receive a message of guidance or of reassurance. And I invite you to take a moment to clearly listen. What is it that you hear? What is the message for you today? I invite you to repeat this message to yourself a couple times. And now, see how fully you can take in that warmth and care and wisdom. Feeling your future self holding you and filling you with loving presence. Sensing that whatever is difficult right now, even the deepest fears and grief, can be included in this open and nurturing presence. Relaxing into your future self's embrace until you sense that you are fully merging with, at one with, your future self. They're here now. Your future self is here. Your future self, that message is from you now to yourself. And I invite us to take some moments to sense how the love and wisdom of this most evolved being or self lives in you now and always. And trusting that with practice, we can access this awakened, compassionate heart space with more and more ease. And when you're ready, I invite you to return your attention to the screen. And I would love and invite sharing in the chat space. One of the nicest benefits of this practice that I've found in the many groups that I've done it this spring is hearing these messages from each other. The hopefulness from the future selves, if you were able to access that today. It can be of great benefit to connect with each other around these messages. And my voice has gotten really strong. It's just keep going, keep going. And it's become a mission statement. So I would love to hear if you're willing to share so that we might share with each other what some of those messages were. So I'm going to read them as they come in. It will all be worth it. My parasympathetic just went off. Thank you. Thank you, Samantha. I mean, literally goosebumps. That's how we know that parasympathetic is getting triggered, the soothing. Everything's going to be okay. Future self embrace, current self on track, doing what is needed. Love yourself. You're going to be okay. I can do this. Oh, I am enough. Keep going. Yeah, let's keep going. You are meeting this challenge. I love it. Stay calm, focus on the now, love yourself. I am strong and I can do this. I keep getting goosebumps. Thank you, everybody. There's a reason and embrace change. Oh, the birds still sing, the rain still falls, and the wind still blows. The leaves of aspen trees, I'm gonna cry. Everything will be okay if we always do all that we can do. Courageous, I got this. This is beautiful. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for the hope. Thank you. So in the beginning, we got that nice burpee exercise, and I was not up for that at all. So you might not be up for what I'm about to invite, but I promise you it's not a burpee. If you're up for it, to introduce physiological well-being, which I already introduced, but there are little things that we can do throughout the day. One, we all need to remember to drink water. I know I don't need to remind you to do that, but I do need to remind me to do that. We know we can see a limp plant in our office, and that the minute we put water on it, sometimes if we haven't gone too far, that plant just plumps right back up. We are no different. And so that's an important thing that we need to do. I'm going to take a sip right now. And I invite us all just to stand up for a simple stretch. Lately, between my sessions, I have a door that goes right outside, and I'll just step outside, look up at the blue sky, and just do a simple stretch. So if you're with me, I invite you to stand up, and on an in-breath, we'll raise our arms up. Lean to the left, lean to the right. Inhale, exhale to the right. And so I offered you practices to down-regulate. This practice is really important for up-regulating when we're in that hypo-arousal place, that exhausted place where we feel like we just are gonna conk out. A 30-second stretch with some movement of our arms, even in our chair, just moving our arms, you can feel moving up that ladder a little bit more into your window. It's easy. Zoom session after Zoom session, the Zoom fatigue that everybody's talking about, a little movement, a little breath can help upregulate. And there's a lot more to this component. I think it's really important to acknowledge that we all don't have access to what we need for physiological well-being, especially in this context. And so bringing that into our awareness, how can we impact this piece for ourselves and for the people that we serve? And the last piece of the puzzle, nature, connecting to the sense of disconnection that we're all feeling. Nature has been my primary antidote in the context that we've been in, and I know that that's true for a lot of folks that I know. Also dogs and cats, they're nature too. What we forget, I think, is that we are nature too. We forget what our nature is. Our nature is resilient. Our nature is adaptive. Our nature as human beings is incredibly skillful at solving problems. I believe that. And we are no different than the nature that is around us. And yes, we have influenced the context that we're in on a large scale by not remembering that what we are putting into the environment is also coming back into us. Nature, connecting to this resource, can be incredibly helpful for bringing us back into balance as individuals. We know that physiologically, just spending time in nature, there have been studies around this, our cortisol levels, the stress hormone that takes us into that fifth gear place, are measurably reduced. There's a practice called forest bathing that's been studied in Japan, and the cortisol levels in saliva were measured pre and post, spending time immersed within trees, bathing in the forest, and cortisol levels had been reduced. Nature, I think, symbolically also may be the most important piece of the toolkit in terms of reminding us of our interconnectedness, our adaptability, and again, our resilience. Just as spring emerges from the worst winters that we can imagine, we too continue to rise. And nature has helped me remember that immensely this year, and I hope it has for you too. So to summarize, here's where the research underscores these pieces of the toolkit in order for us to feel sustainable, hopeful, that our body, our minds, our spirits, our emotions can stay within a zone of optimal functioning, resilience, empowerment. We can think about it as a balance of being both safe, keeping ourselves within a realm of safety, and that can look different in different contexts, and empowered. When we have awareness around how to care for ourselves and others, we have more ability to skillfully make change. And so there are lots of different ways, lots of different toolkits. This is just one that has been cultivated inside of the context of suicide prevention. So it has a very clear framework. And I hope that it offers you some helpfulness as we enter into this school year, as we enter into a lot of unknowns on the horizon. I hope that it empowers you to feel that there is something that you can control inside of this context of disorientation and change. So thank you for your time, and I'll open it up to Q&A now and stop the share. Thank you all so much. Just getting to do this and hear from you really fills my heart. It's part of my own resiliency, so thank you. These groups are wonderful during this time. Thank you.